If you have to choose between a goal and a system, choose the system. Because a system gives you the chance to fail every day and still move forward, while a goal makes you feel like you're losing until you achieve it. There are books that don't speak with the tone of a philosopher or an expert, but with the voice of someone who was once lost, once fell, and still smiles while recounting that story. How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big is one such book, a strange chronicle of making mistakes, continuously, systematically, and then winning big. Adams, who was once unemployed, lost his voice, and suffered business losses, became one of America's most successful authors thanks to his cartoon character. But the interesting part isn't the outcome, it's how he built a life philosophy based on failure. For him, mistakes aren't something to avoid, but data to redesign one's own operating system. The book doesn't teach how to set goals, it doesn't talk about passion, nor does it offer 10 steps to success. Instead, it asks a simple question. If goals exhaust us, can we live differently, where energy, not achievement, is at the center of life? This question opens up a paradoxical yet convincing way of thinking. Because most of what we believe about success is based on illusions. The illusion that successful people have clear plans, the illusion that effort is always enough, the illusion that willpower can overcome anything. Scott Adams peels back these layers of belief and reveals something so simple it's hard to believe. Success doesn't belong to the strongest, but to those with the most resilient system. In this book, failure is seen as a series of experiments. Each mistake isn't a setback, but a measurement. If your system is flexible enough to learn, you never truly fail. This isn't just advice about work or career, but a new way of looking at life itself. Build yourself a mechanism that can tolerate errors. Surprisingly, this book doesn't advocate for ease. It encourages action, but intelligent action focused on things that generate energy, like health, relationships, and curiosity. When energy is abundant, the world starts responding differently. Luck, as he says, isn't a gift, but a byproduct of a system working correctly. Perhaps this isn't a book for those who believe success is a destination. It's for those who want to understand how they operate as an emotional biological machine. Knowing when you're wrong, knowing how to fix it, knowing how to laugh. A book written not to promise, but to free people from the illusion that they must win all the time. And the question for the reader, after closing the book, isn't how to succeed, but if I fail again tomorrow, will my system be strong enough for me to keep smiling and moving forward? I don't know if you could call it madness or a deviation from the normal trajectory. I just remember waking up that morning and realizing I couldn't speak, not hoarseness or a cold, but an absolute silence, as if my brain had cut off communication with the world. I could only talk to my cat. It listened, blinked, and responded with a silence even more perfect than mine. I went to the doctor. The doctor shook his head, sent me to a psychologist. No one said I was crazy, but they all looked at me as if I was about to explode. They prescribed medication and told me to rest. I refused. I didn't believe I'd lost my mind. But when a person can't speak to their fellow humans, only to animals, the line between sanity and madness becomes as thin as a thread. I was a person who made a living with words. I drew stories, told stories, spoke in front of thousands of people. Yet now, my only tool, my voice, had disappeared. I could still sing, still read poetry. But when facing people, my throat would constrict, a subtle betrayal of the body. It chose silence when it needed to speak and only spoke when no one was listening. That was the loneliest time of my life. Lonely not because no one was around, but because I was cut off from the flow of conversation, pushed out of the space where everyone else existed. I became a ghost in my own room. And the strangest thing was that I was still hired to give speeches. I stood backstage. The auditorium was packed. The light streamed down like white blades. The host read my name and I walked out, a man who was both unsure if he could speak and knew that he had to speak. Everything inside me tightened, my heart pounded. Then my voice emerged, not perfectly clear, not beautiful, but audible enough to make the crowd laugh, enough for them to believe I was fine. I spoke for 45 minutes, then stepped down, and immediately lost my voice again. At that moment, I knew the problem wasn't in my throat. It was in my brain, in the context, in the way the world and I connected. My voice was a conditional system. It only worked when I played my main role. When I returned to being a real person, it switched off. I started to view failure as an experiment, not a catastrophe. I asked myself, were there any hidden rules behind my body's resistance? I took notes, tried speaking in different situations, looking for patterns. I realized that when I knew exactly what I was doing, I could speak. When I was just trying to speak to survive, I went silent. That question opened up another chain of discoveries. Perhaps every failure in my life contained the same structure. They didn't come to end things, but to teach me about the system I hadn't understood from my illness. I began to recall all my past failures, unfinished work, exploded ideas, ruined projects. Each time I thought the world was punishing me. Now I know. Perhaps the world was just testing the patience of my inner system. After that speech, I was no longer afraid of failure. I was glad I still felt fear. Fear meant I still had energy. Losing my voice taught me to listen, and listening made me realize that most successful people I knew didn't follow any map. They simply instinctively operated their own systems. I started experimenting on myself. I shed all old beliefs. Passion is the key, goals are the compass, effort will be rewarded. All of it collapsed when I lost my voice. I had nothing left to prove but my existence. And in that state, I found a new kind of freedom, the freedom of someone who had lost all means but could still stand up. From then on, I began to rewrite my life as an open experiment. I wasn't looking for formulas, I was looking for patterns. I was looking for consistency. Every time failure repeated, I marked it down. Every time accidental success occurred, I dissected it. I realized that everything in life, even madness, follows a logic if you're patient enough to observe it. And so, while others saw me as sick, I was living the most lucid days of my life. I began to believe that failure is the raw version of success. The only difference is that we haven't tuned its frequency correctly. I used to think passion was the fuel for success, until I realized it was just smoke blown from the back of luck. Passion doesn't create success. Success makes people passionate. I've met enough people to understand that. Guys who opened sports stores because they loved sports, people who invested in dreams instead of spreadsheets. They burned brightly and then extinguished quickly like matches. I worked at a bank, and my experienced boss taught me a strange lesson: never lend money to people pursuing their passion. If someone says they love cake and want to open a bakery, refuse them. Lend to the dry, pragmatic person who only sees cash flow. They survive. Those immersed in emotion often drown in their own dreams. The world doesn't reward zeal, it only pays those who know how to measure. I realized I used to be an aimless enthusiast. Every time a project started, I was so excited I believed the universe was on my side. But when it failed, the emotions dissolved like foam. Passion is a temporary physical phenomenon, like heat rising from something about to cool down. If you look closely at people who claim to live for passion, you'll see the same pattern. When they succeed, they call it love. When they fail, they stay silent. As for me, after dozens of failures, I learned to be silent before being forced to. My list of failures is as long as an unfinished symphony. A rosin bag with Velcro strips that no one bought, a book on meditation that sold 3 copies, a video game that took 2 years to program and died before launch, a website for crazy ideas filled with garbage by users, a restaurant that went bankrupt despite delicious food, a nutritional burrito that made diners pass gas all day. I'm not exaggerating. I lived in a battlefield of ideas and broken bones. Yet failure taught me something passion never could: how to read the world. I learned that ideas have no value, only action is worth money. That timing can kill a project, no matter how brilliant. That collaboration can make you a hostage to others. And that patience, if misplaced, is as dangerous as stupidity. I used to think I just needed to be stronger after each fall. Nietzsche said, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." He was wrong. I didn't just want to be stronger. I wanted to be wiser, more agile, and cool enough to dissect failure like a surgeon performing an autopsy on himself. Once failure almost took my life. An interview in the middle of a New York winter. I foolishly wore a thin shirt, thinking confidence would keep me warm. My car broke down in a snowstorm. I ran through the night, my feet numb. And only when the headlights of a truck shone on my face did I realize I had just escaped the brink of death. In that moment, I swore I would never live in a snowy place again. I traded my broken car for a plane ticket to California and inadvertently took the first step on the journey that led to everything I have today. I still remember the feeling of sitting on the plane, looking at the clouds below, a single thought echoing in my head. If every failure could be bought with a life, I would be rich beyond compare. From then on, I began to see failure as capital, the only asset I truly possessed. I collected them, categorized them, remembering their causes, consequences, and timing. I realized something important. Failure never comes to make you poorer. It only comes to teach you how to properly value everything. And thanks to failure, I began to envision the first pieces of a different equation, a way of life I would later call a system. I hadn't named it then, but I could feel its rhythm. Each time a door closed, a small behavior within me adjusted. Each time I lost something, I understood another operating principle. Failure is the background software of human intelligence. It runs silently, unassumingly, without needing updates, quietly restructuring every decision. And I, who had fallen more times than anyone, finally began to realize I was no longer free-falling. I was sliding on that very system. I understood that success wasn't a destination, it was just another form of failure accepted by the crowd. I used to live by goals and they exhausted me. Goals are like a dangling promise that you haven't fulfilled each day. A system, no matter how small, gives you the feeling of moving forward. I realized this on a short flight, sitting next to a stranger. He was the CEO of a manufacturing company. We talked, and he said something that changed my life. Your job isn't to work. Your job is to find better work. At that moment, I understood. The world isn't designed for those who wait, but for those who are always moving. Goal setters often stop after reaching their target, then scramble to find a new one. People with systems never stop, they just adjust their pace, never running out of direction. I remembered every time I achieved something, finishing a project, completing a speech, and the emptiness that followed. I had won, but I felt like I had failed. Goals can only give you a moment of happiness. A system gives you a process of living. I started observing truly successful people. They never said, "I will achieve this." They only said, "I am working this way." They lived as if success was a byproduct of habit. When I applied that, my life began to change. I no longer strived to be a famous cartoonist. I just drew every day, learned to write every day, observed how others laughed every day. My system operated on consistency, not expectation. During that time, I still worked at a bank and later at a telecommunications company. Two environments so dry that any creative person would suffocate. I used to think I was failing there. But then I understood that those years in that mundane environment gave me the material to create the world of Dilbert*, where soulless employees and stupid systems became endless inspiration. It turns out that what you hate can be the most valuable raw material if you know how to recycle it. As my system gradually took shape, I noticed an important difference. People who want and people who decide are two different species. Those who want always say, "If only." Those who decide say, "I will do." A decision isn't an emotion, it's an action with a defense mechanism. Once you've chosen, you must create an environment that forces you not to turn back. When I decided to become a creative, I didn't just write. I changed my living space, my mindset, my daily schedule. So that failure had no place to hide. In my work, I met countless people who wanted to be rich, wanted to advance, wanted recognition. They talked a lot but had no system. They lived on hope, while hope is the most volatile asset. I began to cut out everything that didn't serve my system. I gave up useless meetings, energy-draining relationships, even the goal of pleasing others. I replaced them with small processes: read, observe, experiment, record, adjust. Every day, I got a little better. Even though I didn't know where I was going, the feeling of operating powerfully was stronger than any achievement. The further I went, the more I realized that a system can only live if its fuel is energy. Every success or failure boils down to one question: does this activity drain your energy or replenish it? I started measuring everything by that metric. If work made me wither, even if it brought money, it was a burden. If an activity excited me, even if it wasn't profitable yet, it was an investment. Energy became the true currency of life. And paradoxically, energy comes from the right kind of selfishness. When I learned to take care of myself, eating well, sleeping enough, exercising, saying no to others, I ended up helping more people. I wrote better, drew more consistently, thought deeper. I no longer sacrificed myself for work. I nurtured myself so that my work benefited. That selfishness wasn't cruel, it was the foundation of all sustainable contribution. I looked back at myself, a person who had lost his voice, who had stumbled through dozens of failures. Now I sat here talking about energy as if it were a new religion. But I don't worship it, I merely respect its laws. When energy increases, the world opens up. When energy decreases, all doors close. My system, though simple, has 3 layers: maintain energy, expand skills, identify repeating patterns. Each layer elevates the one below it. And from meaningless repetition, I found meaning, not passion, not goals, just the steady operation of a human being learning to transform failure into fuel. I no longer sought shortcuts to success. I only sought a way of life where every day's failure was useful for the next. Because if you live by a system, even mistakes are assets. When I talk about healthy selfishness, many people frown. They think it's an excuse for a self-centered lifestyle. But the right kind of selfishness doesn't harm anyone. It's the only way to survive without melting down. I used to believe that happiness came from helping others, but then I discovered that if you're depleted of energy, all your kindness is just a formality. To give a lot, you must first be full. I saw a whole generation exhausted from trying to be good. They gave in, accommodated, sacrificed, and gradually became irritable and resentful. I chose the opposite path, taking care of myself as an obligation, not a reward. Eating well, sleeping enough, exercising. Staying away from people who drained my energy. Each small action made me healthier and, strangely, also kinder. When you're healthy, you can listen without impatience, help without expecting reciprocation. From then on, I also understood that energy isn't a metaphor, it's the most accurate measure of life. It's like profit in business. If you can't calculate your energy, you don't know if you're gaining or losing. I started applying this rule to every choice. A meeting that exhausted me? Cut it. A job that made me lose track of time? Keep it. Every morning I asked myself, what will increase my energy today, even if just a little? Energy doesn't come from success. It comes from a sense of control. When you know you're operating a system, no matter how small, you feel secure. When I write, I don't chase inspiration. I chase rhythm. I don't wait for the perfect day. I create the possible day. These repetitive, mundane but effective chains of action generate consistent energy more reliably than any burst of excitement. One day I realized attitude is also a form of energy. I used to think emotions were just natural, uncontrollable reactions, but it turns out attitude is a skill, and a skill can be trained. I started experimenting like an amateur scientist. When something bad happened, I didn't react immediately. I paused for a few seconds, long enough for my brain to choose the most beneficial response. Gradually, I found myself less angry, less panicked, and as a result, made fewer mistakes. Managing attitude is managing emotional energy. When someone insults you, they don't take away your honor, they drain your battery. If you react, you give them control of your energy. I learned not to let anyone plug into my outlet. It sounds cold, but in reality, it's the only way to stay warm. In the years that followed, when my voice loss returned in episodes, I no longer panicked. I saw it as a tool to measure my inner energy. Each time my voice disappeared, I knew I had deviated from the system. Too little sleep, overworking, or emotional drain. When my voice returned, I knew I was back in rhythm. The body is a more honest measuring device than any chart. I had lived long enough to understand that life doesn't require you to be the best. It just requires you to operate yourself more effectively than yesterday. My system is simple: enough sleep, real food, rhythmic work, avoiding bad people, recording good things. But it creates such a solid foundation that every storm becomes a test, not a disaster. And looking back, I see everything started from a seemingly foolish mistake. I had let the world exhaust me by trying to pursue others' goals. Now I only pursue energy. I choose work not for fame, but because I can wake up every morning without feeling heavy. I choose relationships not out of obligation, but because I feel like I become a brighter version of myself. I no longer believe in happiness formulas. I only believe in the flow of energy through each day, the only thing that doesn't lie. When energy is full, everything has meaning. When it's depleted, even dreams become burdens. Now I understand. All that I once thought were failures, illnesses, losses, humiliations, bankruptcies were actually just charging stations to replenish the right kind of energy. They forced me to stop, to listen, to restructure. And when I stood up, I was no longer the old me. I was a recharged version, fine-tuned for long-term operation. I never found the meaning of life, I only found its mechanism. And that mechanism is very simple. If something makes you stronger, brighter, more alert, keep doing it. If not, stop. All the great philosophy of my life boils down to one sentence: live in such a way that your energy continuously increases. So, from a man who lost his voice, I found my own voice, not in my vocal cords, but in my way of life. No longer chasing passion, goals, or recognition, I simply pursue the steady rhythm of energy. The rhythm of a life that isn't perfect but knows how to operate itself as a system that's always running, even when all other software collapses. I used to think everything in my body was against me. But then one morning, as I woke up amidst a vague exhaustion, I suddenly realized that all my silent efforts had begun to work. No magic, just a subtle shift in how I saw the world. When you believe you're moving in the right direction, every cell seems to adjust to match that belief. The system had learned to operate itself. It was working. I looked back at my small actions, taking notes, reflecting, trial and error. All of it was no longer disjointed. I understood that the human body isn't just a biological machine, but an operating system that knows how to respond, learn, and adapt. And I started to realize that not just in my mind, but also in my hands. One day, my right pinky finger suddenly twitched. It trembled involuntarily, stiffened when I held a pen, went limp when I tried to control it. I thought it was just hand fatigue, but it got worse and worse. That little finger became the first sign that my nervous system was sending strange signals. When it rebelled, I understood that my body was resisting my work rhythm, stress, and the invisible coercion I once considered discipline. So I began to observe myself like an outsider. I discovered a strange connection between that finger and the voice I had lost before. My body seemed to be speaking its own language, a language that my mind was always too noisy to hear. Each twitch, each shortness of breath was like a warning. Something was wrong with how I was operating. I went everywhere looking for answers. Doctors offered all sorts of theories, but no one grasped the essence. I started researching myself, reading, taking notes, experimenting. And in that process, I made a strange discovery. Every time I changed my beliefs, my body also changed its reactions, emotions, attitudes, thoughts. All of it affected nerves, blood vessels, breathing. It was during that period that I accepted an invitation to speak at a major conference. My voice was still unstable then. I worried that I would go silent mid-speech like before. But when I stepped onto the stage, something miraculous happened. I spoke smoothly, without hesitation, with no spasms in my throat. Only when the talk ended did my voice disappear again. That contrast haunted me. Clearly, the problem wasn't in my vocal cords, but in the connection between consciousness and mental state. I searched for information, and one long night, amidst hundreds of pages of medical documents, I stumbled upon the phrase, spasmodic dysphonia. I read every line of the description, a rare neurological disorder causing abnormal spasms of the laryngeal muscles during speech. All the symptoms matched. Finally, my illness had a name. Just naming it made me feel like I had regained control. When something has a name, it becomes defined. And when it's defined, you can start to measure it. I remembered the initial feeling when I learned I wasn't crazy, just had a faulty nerve. I let out a long, truly liberating laugh. Perhaps humor is how the brain finds order when the world becomes irrational. And from that, I understood that every disorder in life can become data if we are calm enough to record it. After the diagnosis, I began to study more deeply the connection between body and mind. I saw that every behavior, every emotion, left a neurological trace, like a piece of code being run. When we change our thoughts, that code rewrites itself. The human mind is an internal programmer, and we are the ones who write the code. No AI, no machines needed. The brain is already a supercomputer, it just needs to be operated correctly. From then on, I began to experiment with small mental models. I imagined myself speaking fluently. I wrote the sentence, "I speak perfectly," dozens of times every day as if I were reprogramming the software in my head. At first, I felt silly. Then, gradually, something strange happened. My voice actually improved, not quickly, but noticeably. Each time I wrote that affirmation, I felt my body respond. My throat spasmed less, my breathing deepened. It seemed the brain didn't distinguish between reality and something repeated enough times. When you tell yourself something long enough, it becomes an operating signal. I began to apply this technique to all areas: health, creativity, work. I wrote that I would find new opportunities, live healthily, be happy. And somehow, opportunities began to appear not magic, but because my mind started recognizing signals related to what I was focusing on. What people call luck is perhaps just reprogrammed attention. Many asked me, "Do you really believe those sentences?" I answered, "I don't need to believe. I just need to repeat, because belief is an emotion, while repetition is an action. Emotions fluctuate, actions create habits, and habits are what shape reality. Affirmations aren't promises, they are a method to reshape the mind's focus." I gradually realized that both humor and affirmations are two sides of the same mechanism. They change perspective, and from that, change results. When you turn something scary into a joke, you neutralize its power. When you repeat something positive, you accustom your brain to it and it behaves accordingly. The mind is a self-learning system. It just needs enough repetitive input to create new patterns. If someone asks me the greatest secret to success, I will say, reprogram yourself with laughter and words. Humanity's two oldest tools, language and laughter, are precisely the original software we forgot how to use. They connect body and consciousness, emotion and action, failure and hope. I never believed I could overcome failure. I only learned to redefine it. Each time life threw a curveball, I wrote a new affirmation. Each time I felt pain, I found a reason to laugh. And gradually, I realized that what I called a system was actually the mind learning the art of operating in this chaotic world. I no longer feared bad days when everything fell apart. I knew that was when the system was trying a new update. When my voice disappeared, I knew it was resting, preparing for a clearer sound. As I sit here writing these words, I know with all the stillness in my heart that everything, no matter how messy, is already working. People often say that happiness is the ultimate reward of a journey, something that comes when we are successful enough, have enough money, enough status. I used to believe that until I realized that happiness isn't a destination, it's the fuel that keeps the system running. When I'm happy, I work better, I'm more creative, I view things with a more forgiving eye. Conversely, whenever I'm exhausted, I become foolish not because I lose capability, but because I run out of energy. I once went through a period where everything seemed stable. A good job, reputation, high income. But every morning I woke up, my body felt heavy as stone, not depression, just emptiness. And in that emptiness, I suddenly understood that life energy is more important than achievement. Success without energy is like a lamp without electricity, still bright in memory, but extinguished in the present. I began to observe the people around me. Those full of energy were often happier, even if they weren't wealthy. They tended to do better, connect better, and have more luck. Happiness, it turns out, is an energy amplifier. It's not the reward for success, but a prerequisite for success to appear. When I understood that, I stopped searching for the secret to happiness, because no formula lasts forever. I simply started noting what filled me with energy and keeping it, and what drained my energy and eliminating it. A conversation that excited me, keep it. A person who exhausted me even after 10 minutes, stay away. A task that kept me awake all night with excitement, continue it. A chore that made me count every minute until I could escape, stop. Happiness isn't in goals, but in how we manage energy. The paradox is that when you prioritize happiness, success comes easier because a happy mind operates more effectively. Optimists see opportunities where pessimists only see risks. I've tried it and I know, whenever I'm in a good mood, I write better, think clearer, and interact with people more easily. Optimism isn't a trait. It's a skill that can be trained, like building muscle. Every time you choose to look at a problem positively, you're increasing your mental resilience. Some people say, "I can't be falsely optimistic." But you don't need to be fake. Just choose a different perspective when problems arise. Instead of asking, "Why me?" I ask, "If this is a lesson, what does it want to teach?" That question doesn't erase the pain, but it shifts the mind from victim to learner, and a learner always has the right to move forward. I used to be caught in the illusion that happiness comes after achieving some accomplishment. But after each achievement, I felt empty because that joy didn't come from within, but from being recognized by others. I stopped and realized that all success formulas are meaningless if the internal system is unstable. Happiness is a sign that the system is running smoothly. Once I asked myself, if success doesn't make us happy, then what is success for? The answer came from the simplest thing: to understand that the purpose of life isn't to accumulate victories, but to maintain one's own sustainable operating state. A happy person isn't happy because they have a lot, but because they know when to stop, when to move forward, when to be silent, when to smile. When you learn how to be happy, everything else becomes easier. The body responds better, the voice softens, the mind brightens, and interestingly, happy people are often considered lucky. But luck is actually just energy at the right frequency. When you maintain a positive state, you attract things on the same frequency. The world doesn't reward those who are overly serious, but those who know how to enjoy the game. When I stopped seeing life as a test and started treating it as a laboratory, I felt relieved. Every mistake became data, every failure a vivid biological lesson. I no longer sought happiness, I lived in it as a natural condition. Now I understand why some people never search for themselves. They're too busy living with high energy to need to ask more questions. They eat, speak, work, and love in a way that increases energy rather than decreases it. And that is the true state of happiness, not laughter, but the feeling that the energy flow within you is moving in the right direction. When you realize happiness is fuel, you automatically restructure your life. You stop pursuing meaningless goals, stop comparing, stop struggling. You start acting not because you have asterisk to, but because you asterisk want asterisk to keep the energy flowing. That's the first step to becoming self-operating, someone who doesn't need external motivation because they've generated their own internal current. I used to think the mind was the control center of my life, but the more I observed, the more I understood that the body is the root of every system. An exhausted mind cannot think clearly. A weak body cannot generate ideas. We don't live by willpower, but by biological energy, which we replenish daily through how we eat, sleep, move, and breathe. I'm not good at discipline. I tried dozens of diets and abandoned them all. Each time I failed, I learned something new. No single formula works for everyone. The body is like a sophisticated system. Each person is programmed differently. Some people feel healthy on a vegetarian diet, others become weak. Some need high-intensity exercise, others just need to walk. No one can copy another person's success. The only thing you can trust is the data from your own body. I began to experiment seriously. I'd eat something, then observe my energy level 2 hours later. If I felt alert, I kept it. If sluggish, I eliminated it. I did the same with sleep, work hours, and even my environment. Everything I did became an energy test, and gradually, I built a personalized nutrition and lifestyle system for myself. My body started responding positively. I was more alert in the mornings, less reliant on coffee, less prone to the foggy exhaustion I used to consider normal. When energy is sufficient, the mind automatically becomes clearer, decisions are quicker, and emotions are more stable. It turns out health isn't just a foundation, it's the operating fuel for every decision. One of the most important discoveries was that environment matters more than willpower. When I kept my fridge full of healthy food, I didn't need to force myself to eat right. When my workspace was always tidy, I didn't need to struggle to focus. When my desk was far from the sofa, I no longer fell into laziness. Willpower is an easily depleted resource, while environment is a self-sustaining framework. Therefore, I didn't set a goal to be healthy. I just designed an environment that made being healthy the easiest thing to do. I stopped blaming myself for being lazy about exercise and replaced it with a strategy: how to be lazy and still be healthy. I chose to walk every day instead of forcing myself to run. I adopted the habit of working standing up to avoid prolonged sitting. I replaced coffee with lemon-flavored water. Health doesn't come from massive effort, but from thousands of small, repetitive choices. I also realized another truth: energy has cycles. Some days you're full of vitality, some days you're completely drained. The important thing is not to panic when energy is low. Just allow the system to rest. The body needs time to regenerate, like a machine needs maintenance. I used to think resting was a waste, but now I understand it's a strategic action. If you don't recharge, the system collapses. During that time, I began to understand more clearly the relationship between body and emotion. When I ate poorly, I was easily irritable. When I lacked sleep, I was pessimistic. When I exercised, I was more optimistic without even trying. It turns out emotions aren't something to be controlled by reason, but by biology. Humans are wet robots and fuel determines the software. I used to find it funny when someone said, "Listen to your body." Now I understand. That's the wisest advice in the world. The body always knows what's right before the brain can rationalize it. It sends signals through your heart rate, your breath, your alertness after a meal, the headache after a toxic conversation. The problem is we're too busy to listen. Once I started listening, everything changed. I knew when to stop working, when to go out, when to be silent. I discovered that when I thought I needed motivation, I actually just needed sleep. No psychology can cure biological fatigue. When you're hungry, eat. When you're sleepy, sleep. When you're stressed, walk. Simple enough to be overlooked, but those are the fundamental principles of a living system. The further I went, the more I believed that energy is the true measure of all success. A person full of energy always appears confident, creative, and attractive not because they try to, but because they genuinely have an abundance of vitality. Conversely, an exhausted person might speak optimistic words, but their voice lacks power, and the world somehow always responds truthfully to the energy frequency we emit. Now I don't set goals to live long or stay young forever. I just want to wake up every day feeling my body functioning smoothly, not hindering my mind. When the body is healthy, the mind is clear. All problems become more manageable. Health isn't a minor part of life, it's the operating system. Everything else, talent, creativity, emotions, are just applications running on it. I used to think success required a perfect plan, meticulously calculated steps, and a series of complex strategies. But after years of experimentation, I discovered a rule so simple it's almost paradoxical. All great things start with simplicity. The more complex, the more easily the system breaks. The more cumbersome, the more energy leaks. When I learned to eliminate rather than add, life began to run smoother than ever. I applied this principle to everything. When writing, I removed decorative words. When working, I limited the number of people I had to meet. When making decisions, I didn't ask how to make it perfect, but how to make it easiest. Simplicity is the pinnacle of wisdom. A good idea must be strong enough to stand in its simplest form. Everything else is just ego-driven display. I realized that the world rewards those who act, not those who merely think. I used to have dozens of projects that stopped at the great idea stage. They never materialized not because I lacked ability, but because I wanted everything to be right from the start. But nothing is right before we begin. Only action reveals what's wrong. And it's that wrongness that leads us to what's right. I started changing my workflow. No 10-step plans, just start with one step I could take today. When an idea emerged, I no longer thought about the risks, but about the smallest viable version. I tried, failed, adjusted, and tried again. Like a builder who doesn't need a complete blueprint of the castle to lay the first brick. In that journey, I discovered an interesting concept. Luck isn't a gift, but a byproduct of the number of attempts. When you act a lot, you create more pathways for opportunities to appear. Others look and call it good fortune, but you're actually just playing the game of probability with higher odds. Every action you take is a lottery ticket, and the more you act, the more tickets you hold. I started living as if luck could be manufactured. I tried many projects at once, met many people, wrote many ideas. Most failed, but a few % of successes were enough to change the entire system. No big hits in my life came from meticulous calculation. All came from persistent action. When I no longer worried if something was worth it, I became more proactive than ever. All doors opened, not because I knocked correctly, but because I knocked many times. Another thing I discovered was the illusion of time. Most of us think we lack time, but in reality, we just lack energy. When energy is low, everything moves slowly, every task feels heavy. When energy is high, time seems to expand, a lot can be done in an hour. So I no longer tried to manage time, I managed energy. When I felt drained, I stopped. When I felt excited, I worked. I lived by the rhythm of energy, not by the clock. From then on, I also started to view productivity differently. The best person isn't the one who does the most, but the one who knows how to choose the right things to do. A small action, done at the right time, can be worth hundreds of hours of misguided effort. Wisdom lies in recognizing the leverage points, the small actions that create big effects. Successful people don't do more, they touch the right pivot points of the system. Sometimes I think perhaps the greatest secret of life is learning how to do less, but more effectively. Eliminating the useless is the quickest way to move forward. Simplicity doesn't make life poorer, it concentrates energy. When everything is untangled, the system naturally accelerates. I've seen so many people engrossed in perfect plans, endless to-do lists, never-ending meetings. They think they're busy, but they're actually just resisting simplicity. Meanwhile, the most successful people I know live incredibly minimalist lives. Fewer tasks, fewer people, fewer decisions, and therefore, they have surplus energy for the important things. I also used to be obsessed with the feeling of being late. I feared time passing, feared aging, feared missing opportunities. But the more I feared, the more energy I lost. One day I realized no one is truly late if they are still moving. Time isn't an opponent, it's a current you can join if you maintain your own rhythm. When energy is stable, you don't need to chase, you just need to walk steadily and the current will carry you. When I understood that, I started to slow down. Paradoxically, I accomplished more. When I stopped trying to control everything, everything started to fall into place. It turns out doing less doesn't mean being lazy, but doing the right thing at the right rhythm with the right energy. Success isn't in a 100-page plan, but in a simple action repeated long enough with the right energy. No need for perfection, just persistence. Because the world isn't designed for the best, but for those who still have enough energy to try one more time. The further I went, the more I realized that humans are actually no different from a biological machine. A wet robot, programmed by emotions, hormones, and circumstances. We think we're free, but most behaviors are reflexes, eating when sad, yelling when angry, silent when afraid. What is called personality is just a collection of habits repeated long enough to resemble a self. When I understood that, I no longer tried to change myself. I started reprogramming my reactions. Every machine has software, and so do humans. The difference is that we can rewrite our own code. I began to observe every small reaction. Each time I got angry, I noted the cause. Each time I felt anxious, I traced its origin. Each time I judged someone, I asked what purpose this served in my system. It was in those moments that I interrupted the automatic loop and shifted to an active state. Consciousness doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to interject at the right time. I saw clearly that systems thinking is the only way to master life. If you view the world as a disconnected series of events, you'll always react too late. But if you see everything as a network, where behavior, environment, and emotions are tightly linked, you can change any part to affect the entire system. For example, just by getting enough sleep, you become less irritable. When you're less irritable, you make clearer decisions. Good decisions help you succeed. Success, in turn, fosters a positive attitude. Each small link is leverage for the entire chain. I call that the chain reaction of energy. My system doesn't need to be the strongest, it just needs to be stable and self-recovering. When one part malfunctions, health, work, emotions, I don't panic. I adjust the surrounding parts just like a maintenance engineer. I learn not to hit the error, but to lubricate around it. From that, I realized that attitude is the most important skill in life. Not intelligence, not willpower, but the ability to control your reactions. When you control your attitude, you are no longer buffeted by the world. I used to think attitude was an emotion, but it's actually a biological habit. The brain just needs to be trained to choose more beneficial reactions. Like muscles, attitude can be trained. I started practicing. When something bad happened, I didn't ask, why me? But what can we make of this? At first, it sounded fake, but after a few months, my brain started automatically looking for the positive angle. One day, I realized my reactions had changed completely. Instead of complaining, I smiled. And that smile, strangely enough, brought energy back. I understood that a system is truly strong when it has the ability to psychologically self-heal each time it's hurt. Instead of trying to forget, I observed how I healed. Each time I failed, I watched how my body reacted: pounding heart, trembling hands, rapid breathing, and then learned how to adjust. The body is like a control panel. If you know how to look, you'll see where the red lights are flashing. When you calm down, the lights turn green again. I also realized that the most frightening thing isn't loss, but losing the ability to control one's reactions. When angry, people lose their minds. When afraid, they lose their reason. When exhausted, they lose faith. Therefore, maintaining attitude is keeping the system alive. I train myself to react slowly, just a few seconds between stimulus and action. Those few seconds are the firewall of the mind. They prevent emotions from taking over and allow reason to intervene. One day, I looked at the world around me and realized everyone was operating like wet robots. Those who know they are robots still have a chance to update their software. Those who think they are absolutely free will be controlled by their own systems. I no longer disdained habits, I respected them, because habits are the only code we can rewrite. From then on, I applied this mindset to everything: eating, working, loving, failing. I no longer forced myself to be better, I simply improved the system. I no longer chased goals, I just made sure that each day I operated more smoothly than the last. Progress doesn't need to be noisy. It happens silently, like software updating overnight. And then I came to a conclusion. Humans are not born to be perfect, but to adjust. Every mistake is a bug report. Every pain is an error notification. Every recovery is an upgrade. When you accept that, you stop hating yourself. You are simply the engineer of this system, sometimes clumsy, but always learning. Now, looking back, I see life is no longer as terrifying as it once was. The world is still chaotic, people are still irrational, but I no longer need it to change. I just need to keep my system running in rhythm. I eat for energy, work to maintain interest, rest to recover, laugh to release pressure. I don't strive for perfection, I just need to operate sustainably. I end this journey with a simple belief: everything we need is already within the system. The body knows how to heal, the mind knows how to relearn, the attitude knows how to turn towards the light. We just need to be alert enough not to hinder that process. When I understood that I was just a wet robot who knows how to laugh, how to make mistakes, how to fix them, I felt immense relief. Life is no longer a problem to be solved, but a program to be continuously updated. And if every day I wake up and still feel the energy flowing, can still laugh, can still learn something new, then for me, that system is still working perfectly. Most of us are taught that success is the reward for persistence and clear goals. But what if things don't work that way? What if the truth lies in the fact that the system is what truly matters, while goals are just an illusion to make us feel in control? This book doesn't give us a winning formula, it only shows us how to turn failure into a resource, how to transform every mistake into our own data. The greatest lesson isn't "don't give up," but design so you don't need to give up. Because a good system will run itself, even if you're tired, lazy, or doubting yourself. We learn that happiness isn't a destination but fuel, that health isn't secondary but the operating system, that simplicity isn't a deficiency but the peak of efficiency, and that attitude isn't an emotion but a vital skill. When you understand these things, every success story becomes explainable. And failure, no matter how cruel, is just system feedback. Perhaps the most frightening thing isn't making a mistake, but not learning anything from it. We often try to bounce back stronger, when we should be bouncing back smarter. Have you ever wondered how many times you repeat the same mistake simply because you think it's a challenge, not a sign that the system is flawed? Adams, through his own life full of failures, quietly shows us a truth. Success isn't a peak, but a state of balance in energy, mindset, and attitude. The person who knows how to maintain energy, understands their own rules, and constantly adjusts will go further than the person who always tries to be excellent in every moment. And perhaps the hardest part of this journey is accepting that you are just a wet robot, not perfect, not invincible, but capable of learning, upgrading, and smiling at your own system errors. When you stop trying to be extraordinary, you start operating naturally, and that is where productivity, joy, and peace converge. So if today you are failing, stop and ask, am I wrong, or is my system just not designed correctly? Am I trying to achieve a goal, or am I building a system that can survive even if that goal collapses? Am I searching for happiness, or am I creating the conditions for happiness to generate itself every day? Sometimes, just by changing the way you ask the question, your entire life will take a different turn. Because ultimately, success isn't about climbing the highest, but about still having enough energy, curiosity, and the ability to smile to keep going.